So this particular review was a commission of one of my good friends, that guy with the shotgun. If you remember my The Thing 2002 complete breakdown review, it was that shotgun. He happens to be a big fan of Spice & Wolf and has been begging for years for me to watch it, and decided to exploit my greed and absolute state of poverty in order to force my hand. Now, while I no longer do commissions because of how much time pressure it puts me under, this was one of the last ones I took, and ultimately I'm glad I did. Spice & Wolf is a well-written, heartfelt story, and though it's one of those anime infamously cut off before the story actually concluded, both seasons knew where to end it in order to convey a sense of fulfillment to the viewer. I've gotta be honest here, I've been racking my brain with how to cover this anime simply because of how good it is. Genuinely good. There's rarely an issue I need to cover regarding it, especially once you get over the teething period that is the first 2 or 3 episodes. That's not to say that the teething period is easy to get through in the first place. Regardless of the source, the story of Spice & Wolf is an incredible romantic slow burn that's stretched over a number of smaller arcs focused primarily on intensive economics. These economic storylines can get overly complex, with looping conspiracies and elaborate triple crosses. But even if you're not so inclined about the economic aspect of the show, you can follow along somewhat smoothly via the characters, their interactions, and their relationships to one another. Unfortunately, the first 2 or 3 episodes drag thanks to a slow establishment of the main duo's dynamic, and the swift introduction of the very first economic scheme, which goes a hair too deep, a hair too quickly for someone not well versed in economics to follow. It's only when the dynamic between the leads Holo and Lawrence really clicks around episode 4 and 5 that the show finds its feet and learns how to carry itself. These issues aren't helped by some of the weird sound design and some clunky voice acting early on. This might not apply to the subbed version of the show, admittedly, but in the English dub, it took the leads a little while to warm themselves into their roles, and it kind of felt like the Foley crew went through a similar growing pain. As for why I chose to watch the dub over the sub, it's because I'm a sucker for J. Michael Tatum's work, and while it's unusual to see him struggle to find Lawrence as a character early on, I was ultimately engrossed by his performance by the end of the show. Likewise, his counterpart Brina Palencia had a stumble here or there finding the correct approach for Holo, but in the long run nailed her bizarrely childish wisdom and noble nature. However, one aspect of the show that never quite improved had to be the music. It's one of those bizarre instances where the show can have some really solid orchestral pieces that fill the setting and leave your blood pumping during an intense series of events.
Give it a rest!
And at other times, you'll be left baffled and confused as to what could barely be passed off as a child's first time playing the recorder.
You couldn't stop for 2 damn minutes! Knock it off!
This did fade further in the second season, with that particular woodwind track gaining far less play, but it didn't necessarily improve the rest of the musical score in comparison. Ultimately, the original soundtrack of Season 1 is more distinct and memorable, marred by repeated use of that damnable flute song, while Season 2 is much more uninteresting but also inoffensive. This is to say nothing of the opening or closing for each season, other than the unfortunately frequent problem of the closing song being wholly dissonant from the tone of the episode we just watched. But other than that, they're fine, and typically pretty relaxing to listen to. All these issues I've mentioned are short-lived in the 26-episode run, but I can understand why so many people, including myself when I was younger, have struggled to get into the show. The problems compound to make the first 2 or 3 episodes daunting for new viewers to get through, as the plot elements happening in the immediacy aren't very exciting, the dynamics are still somewhat vague, and the production is rough around the edges. But managing to push through that, you can arrive at the meat of the show, which is full of interesting twists, turns, and characters that most viewers can sink their teeth into comfortably. Well, there is one other negative, and while it's focal to only a single character, it's still one that sticks out from what could have been the best arc of the show. I'll address it when it comes up. Considering my biggest issues lie with the show's opening, I don't want to cover it here. After plowing through the opening of the series, we can really latch onto the crux of the story, that being the intermingling economic aspirations of Kraft Lawrence and the unusual relationship and romance he shares with Holo the Wise Wolf. I won't lie and say the economic aspect of the show is one that left me grasping at times. I'm fairly confident all the principles are adequately explained, it just feels like when an economic idea is pushed in one of my ears it slips out the other like an ice block down a water slide. But with the help of a notepad, I was able to follow most of what was going on, and from what I can tell, the rules of economics established in the story are followed quite closely. There's rarely a point where the transactions of money didn't make sense, and when they did, it was usually thanks to an outside factor. Like an unexpected depression in the value of military weapons Lawrence planned to trade, or social ostracism stemming from him openly traveling with an unmarried woman. From what I can tell, the fictional setting is heavily based upon the Italian and Germanic Renaissance, especially in relation to how much sway the church has in the world, and thus the rampant environmental factors Lawrence has to consider in his dealings. Everywhere he goes, the church, more or less the Catholic Church, but it's non-denominational as far as the show is concerned, has a great amount of influence over the economics in the world, to the point that some sections of society, such as alchemists, isolate themselves to avoid persecution. This is an element of the story that I have an unusual appreciation for. Having grown up Catholic, I learned about some of the darkest moments in the church's past, and I knew especially in the era of the Borgia how much influence Catholicism could have on the economy. But this show went above and beyond to demonstrate how a religion with a stranglehold on society can pull coin from a purse. While I certainly wasn't fresh to the idea of religious corruption back in the day, the show managed to elaborate on a shadowy section of history that never went fully explained for me. Even if the events themselves are wholly fictitious, the methods employed are so logical I have to imagine they were inspired by real-world events. Just like enjoying this video should inspire you to click that subscribe button and ring that bell. It may even convince you to head over to Twitter and follow me at Raymond McNeil, or perhaps to donate to my Patreon. For $1 or more, you can access the Team Frostbite Discord server, The Tundra, where I, as well as many of my YouTube neighbors, are regularly active. Join my newest patrons, Empyrean Exarch, Terrace Dawn, Cambriel, Infinity, Gone Rampant, Lucas Hewley, Kathy, Philip, Peter Flynn, and Tony Rodarte, as well as all of my other lovely patrons, and having a deep discussion on writing, sharing fresh hot memes, and participating in server movie nights. If you're not feeling that inspired, but still want to help out the channel, share this video around to anyone you think would find it interesting, and comment your thoughts on Spice and Wolf down below. The only way we all learn is to talk together, and that's why I encourage healthy, polite discussion among my viewers. Now that you're hopefully inspired by this really awkward segue, back to the subject matter at hand. Spice and Wolf is very smart with how it divides its economic arcs, allowing each one to stand alone cleanly against the previous, and only occasionally bleeding into one another, and even then it's on a very personal level for the characters. For example, Lawrence swindling a swindler out of a heavy load of arms and armor flows nicely into the next arc where he learns the value for those goods has plummeted and he's come out of it basically destitute. The closest we get to an overarching economic storyline has to do with the yearly expedition to the north that gets cancelled, which upsets the trading balance in the region throughout the 2 seasons, the cause of which is only lightly touched upon in Season 2. And this is where I think Spice and Wolf is strongest in its storytelling. It's not grandiose. Despite the fact that it involves a wolf god taking human form to become a partner to a human merchant, it never feels like there's a grand sweeping change being made to the world by the protagonist. If anything, the story takes a more top-down approach, letting the natural state of the world bear down on the two, forcing them into different actions as they go along. Everything is kept easily compartmentalized and personal. The drawback of this, however, is that the show needs to establish an intimate connection between the viewers, Lawrence, and Holo. And that's where the earlier issues I mentioned could cause problems for some audience members, leaving them unable to invest themselves in the problems that begin to plague the two. But again, once you make it past that hump, the show manages to nail the dynamic between the two and it gets on swimmingly. The overarching plot of the story focuses on the relationship between Lawrence and Holo, and it's the picture-perfect definition of a slow burn romance. I can see why so many people look to the show for quality romance, and that's because there's very little beating around the bush when it comes to the two main characters. Once they get comfortable flirting with one another around episode 3 or 4, the show makes itself on this dynamic where the two have almost flat out stated their mutual attraction to one another. From there, I'd akin the remainder of their dynamic throughout the series as a form of a waltz, a dance to slowly feel out the new and undiscovered aspects of their partner before making a final commitment to be together. In every arc, we push on to learn a new facet about the two, whether it be Lawrence's desire to build a shop, or Holo's drive to find her home, or their mutual complexes over how their disparate dreams might drive them apart sooner rather than later. Even when the two have agreed to stay together, there's an underlying tension between them over the current course of action, typically because they're worried about what will happen to the other person. It's this energy that forms the backbone of the show, breathing life into every economic decision Lawrence has to make. From the high-stakes game of trading in soon-to-be-devalued silver to the sweet ribbing he gives Holo about purchasing honey-pickled apples. All of these elements come together in what I consider to be the best arc of the show at the start of Season 2, the Pyrite Exchange arc. Without giving too many spoilers, it goes something like this. Lawrence and Holo have stopped in a town holding a major festival during which pyrite is being sold by a witch who flees town before the church can catch her. With that, the pyrite she was selling under the guise of it being a magical stone rises sharply in value at the town's market exchange. Opposite this, a rival merchant has challenged Lawrence to a game of economics, bidding a substantial sum against Lawrence's buying to Holo if Lawrence can outbid him at the end of a 3-day period. Due to a number of interpersonal squabbles and social pressures, Lawrence has to accept the challenge, leaving his future with Holo entirely dependent upon winning the game. It's not helped when Holo gives Lawrence the cold shoulder the entire time due to a complicated bump in their relationship. What follows is one of the tensest collection of scenes where all people do is sit around and talk. Take notes, RWBY, this is how you do character investment. With every single decision, Lawrence's growing desperation becomes almost palpable, especially when it seems he's being outmaneuvered at every turn. The climax of this arc is nail-biting, and even though I've known the ultimate fate of Lawrence and Holo's relationship since before I started watching the show, I wasn't sure what kind of detour this could set their dynamic on. I was convinced that it was more than possible that Lawrence could lose, and the rest of the season would be an economic game to try and win Holo back. What happens instead, I won't spoil, as I really do want people to watch this show, but it fulfills the 3 checkmarks of quality this show manages to establish. It's economically feasible, it's emotionally satisfying, and it's logically consistent. It hits this perfect trifecta in such a way that even the following arc, where we get a more direct and physical indication of Lawrence and Holo's relationship growing, doesn't quite hold a candle to it. Except for one thing. Amarty and his stupid voice. Amarty and his stupid voice is hands down the worst character in the show. Not because of his character type, or because of his writing, or because of his appearance. No, Amarty and his stupid voice are bad because, well, he has a really stupid voice.
You must be aware by now of the profits I'm making off the sale of iron pyrite. Then I'm certain to buy more like those in the future. Be sure to tell her how much it pleased me that it made her happy. What could you possibly hope to gain by increasing my wholesale stock? More carpet is then. Thank you very much. Well now, what's on your agenda next? Are you saying the rumors are true? Do you care more for your precious silver than you do for Holo?
I'm normally tolerant of some of the most painfully shrill anime girls on the planet, and yet Amarty and his stupid voice swoop in and make me claw at my ears every time I hear him. He's played by Ryan Reynolds, no, not that Ryan Reynolds II, and I can't tell if it's just her natural voice that gets under my skin or the direction she was given. All the other characters in the show are voiced and directed fine, some even better than that, such as Nora the Shepherd from Season 1 and Helena the Waitress in Season 2, but damned if something about Amarty and his stupid voice doesn't rub me the wrong way. And this is to say nothing of Ryan Reynolds as an actress. I'm sure she's fine, and I'm sure she's a nice gal, but I don't think I've ever seen her in anything I've liked. She voiced young Grey in Fairy Tail, so there's a point against her. She also voiced Rome in Darling in the Franxx. My buddy Tom said that she was not terrific, very grating in that, so take that as you will. Regardless, I found Amarty and his stupid voice to be insufferable, and the mini epilogue it gave to him at the end of the arc was nowhere near enough for me to forgive them for putting me through his existence. Were this arc doable without his specific character, I'd say drop him as soon as possible, but alas, he's integral, and the only black spot in an otherwise peerless arc of the show. So summarizing my thoughts, Spice and Wolf is an incredible anime, but it's difficult to get into, and I can easily see how it might not be for everyone. There is action present, but my lack of mentioning it at all in this video should probably indicate how little it comes into play. No, the core of the show runs on hearts and numbers, and if you don't like that, you're best to veer off course. But if that might interest you and you can stomach 2 or 3 episodes of plotting, I'd encourage you to give it a watch. More than likely, you'll find the show to be quite the wolf in sheep's clothing. What? I got through this whole thing without a single pun. I'm allowed to have at least one. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you'll subscribe to stick around for the next video as I decide to tackle a much more controversial subject. Until then, I'll catch you all on the flip side.